Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, well, that's what we always try to do.
Yeah.
Take this absolute flood of global information, the tech breakthroughs, the really high-stakes geopolitical moves, the science that just pops up and surprises you, and boil it down, make it make sense.
And today, the range of sources is just huge. It really underlines how everything's connected. We're looking at the future of artificial intelligence, AI, governance specifically, big US-UK deal there.
Yeah, huge implications for things like data privacy, national security.
Definitely. And then shifting gears completely, we're tracking escalating military actions, sanctions, particularly between the U.S. and nations in South America. There's a U.S. aircraft carrier involved now.
We'll definitely dig into that.
Yeah.
And also important political changes in Europe, especially the new leadership that's just come in Ireland.
It really feels like we're trying to map, human biology on one hand and the chaos of international relations on the other. It's a lot of noise.
It is. But that's our job, right? To find the signal in that noise, pull the threads together, give you some clarity, some depth.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. And maybe let's start not with the geopolitical fires burning right now, but with the science. The stuff affecting millions, potentially billions of lives, these new frontiers inside the human body.
Yeah, let's start there. And we begin with something genuinely groundbreaking in respiratory medicine. It's about the body's own blueprint for regeneration, specifically how our lungs heal. This could really change the game for chronic lung disease.
It sounds fascinating. So the core discovery, it centers on identifying the hidden switch inside lung cells.
That's right, inside what are called alveolar cells. These are the really tiny, absolutely crucial air sacs in your lungs. They do the gas exchange, getting oxygen into your blood. And apparently they hold this secret mechanism.
A mechanism that decides whether the lung should focus on repairing tissue damage or fighting off an immediate infection.
Precisely. And what's really striking is that the lung doesn't seem to try and do both effectively at the same time. This research found a specific regulatory pathway inside those alveolar cells. It directs the cell. Prioritize repair or prioritize defense.
So if there's a really bad infection, like bacteria or a virus.
Right. If the cell senses that acute, immediate danger, it actively puts the brakes on tissue regeneration. It diverts all its resources, basically, to the immune system to fight off that invader.
Which makes perfect sense from an evolutionary standpoint. You survive the immediate threat first.
Yeah.
But what's the downside? What's the implication for chronic conditions?
That's the crucial part. If that switch gets stuck, maybe because of constant irritation from pollution or, long-term inflammation from smoking, if it stays locked in defense mode, even after the initial threat is gone.
Then the tissue never properly heals, or it heals badly, leading to scarring.
Exactly. That scarring is fibrosis. And this inability to switch back to the default healing and regeneration mode, that's essentially the hallmark of diseases like COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and lung fibrosis. Current treatments, they mostly just manage the symptoms. They don't reverse the underlying damage.
But this discovery,
Yeah.
it suggests maybe we could reverse it, or at least help the body reverse it.
That's the hope. It opens the door for actual regenerative treatments, moving beyond just managing symptoms to actively boosting the body's own recovery systems.
So how would you even manipulate that switch? Is this like gene therapy down the line or something more immediate?
Well, the sources suggest they're exploring small molecule inhibitors. Think of it like a tiny key designed to fit into the specific molecular lock that controls those immune pathway genes.
Okay.
So the idea is if you can inhibit that defense pathway after the infection or the initial injury is dealt with, when the switch is kind of stuck on, you release the brakes. And the lung's natural tendency, its default, is to regenerate.
Wow, that level of biological control, it could be life-changing for people with lungs damaged by, say, pollution or smoking history.
Absolutely. The potential is enormous. It's about restoring function, not just slowing down the decline.
That is genuinely exciting. Okay, so from broad regeneration, let's zoom in a bit to something very specific. Personalized medicine. And there's news on the genetic front regarding hearing loss.
Yes, another significant step forward. Researchers have used whole genome sequencing that's mapping someone's entire DNA code to pinpoint a specific mutation.
Okay, a specific gene.
Yeah, a mutation in the CPD gene. And this particular mutation is linked to a form of genetic hearing loss that can be quite severe, often showing up right in newborns.
That's huge for pediatric audiology, isn't it? Catching it early is so critical for development.
It's absolutely vital. Hearing loss is common, and early intervention makes a massive difference for language acquisition, for social development, everything. Identifying this specific CPD gene mutation means doctors can move beyond just a general diagnosis.
They can tailor the treatment.
Potentially, yes. Knowing the exact genetic cause might inform, say, whether a particular drug therapy could work, or give a clearer idea of how effective something like a cochlear implant might be for that specific child. It really accelerates that personalized approach.
It definitely feels like we're getting closer to truly personalized medicine in some areas.
Right.
But the sources also add a note of caution. Right? We haven't mapped everything out yet.
Not even close. And that's important context. While finding the CPD link is a big win, the estimates are still that for, maybe 30 to 50% of genetic hearing loss cases, the exact cause is still undetermined.
Right. It's a reminder of just how incredibly complex the human genome is. Still so many mysteries packed in there.
For sure. Now let's pivot. We've talked about modern medicine, future possibilities. Let's look back to a historical health crisis that had enormous consequences. Napoleon's disastrous retreat from Russia back in 1812.
Ah, yes. The story, we all learned the Grande Armée destroyed by General Winter, the vast vacancies, the Russians burning everything. That's the standard picture.
That's the standard picture. But this new forensic science work adds a really crucial and grim layer. Scientists managed to extract DNA, not from bones, but from the teeth of soldiers who died during that retreat.
From the teeth. Why teeth?
Well, the pulp inside the tooth, it's quite protected. It acts like a little time capsule, preserving traces of pathogens like bacteria that were in the person's bloodstream when they died.
And they found?
They found evidence of multiple bacterial infections. The sources specifically mention identifying DNA from 2 distinct types of disease-causing bacteria.
So it wasn't just the cold and starvation. Disease was a major killer, maybe even more so than we thought.
That's the reassessment this research forces. It's not saying the winter wasn't brutal or the logistics weren't a nightmare. Of course they were. But it strongly suggests that epidemic disease played perhaps a more central role in the horrific death toll than history has traditionally credited.
You have to imagine the conditions.
Exactly. Tens of thousands of soldiers, exhausted, malnourished, crammed together, often marching alongside the sick and dying. No sanitation, limited medical care. It's a perfect storm for disease transmission.
Instantaneous and lethal.
Utterly. This data suggests soldiers weren't just freezing to death, they were succumbing to waves of infections that likely crippled the army's strength long before the absolute worst of the winter even hit.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Biology often has the last word, no matter the military genius or strategy.
It really is. And that connection between disease and large populations brings us, unfortunately, right up to the present day. We have some concerning public health alerts mentioned in the sources.
Right, hitting closer to home now. The first one is, well, it's depressing, frankly, the resurgence of measles in the U.S.
Yeah, it's incredibly troubling. We're seeing reports of over 100 cases just across Utah and Arizona. Measles is one of the most contagious viruses known to humanity, and it's entirely preventable with the vaccine.
And this isn't isolated. It reflects this wider national trend of vaccination rates dropping, which means community protection, herd immunity is weakening.
Precisely. Health officials warn that once that community immunity drops below about 95%, which some areas are getting dangerously close to, these diseases that we thought were basically gone, they just come roaring back.
And it puts the most vulnerable people at extreme risk, right? Like babies too young to get the vaccine.
Exactly. Infants, immunocompromised individuals, they rely on the community being vaccinated. The second major health concern highlighted is different. It's about cancer trends, specifically the link between lifestyle factors and cancer in younger adults.
Younger adults, what kind of cancers are we talking about?
Experts are noting a definite rise in obesity-related cancers among younger people, and the really stark warning is about colon cancer. The sources cite experts saying it's on track to become a leading cause of cancer deaths in people under 50.
Under 50,
So-
that's shocking. Colon cancer used to be seen primarily as a disease you screen for later in life, maybe
Yeah.
50 plus.
Exactly. But the age of diagnosis is dropping. And the consensus in the sources points pretty strongly towards major shifts in diet, much more sedentary lifestyles, and the consequent rise in obesity and chronic inflammation in younger generations as the main culprits.
So the mitigation strategies are, well, they're what we often hear about, but maybe need to take more seriously at a societal level.
It boils down to that, yes. Diet, exercise, weight management. But the emphasis is shifting towards recognizing this as a public health crisis that needs systemic approaches, not just blaming individuals. We need to make healthier lifestyles easier and more accessible.
A tough challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, so while science grapples with healing our bodies and understanding disease, technology is just relentlessly reshaping, well, everything else. Our workplaces, our daily tasks, even how we view the cosmos. This is where things get really interesting, perhaps a bit unsettling too. Let's move into the digital and space landscape.
And we have to start with this huge AI deal, a multi-billion-dollar agreement between the US and the UK. The goal is basically to position the UK as a major global hub for artificial intelligence development.
Fueled by big investments from U.S. tech companies. Right?
That's the engine behind it. Significant capital, talent flowing into the UK focused on AI innovation.
Which sounds great for economic development, for positioning the UK at the forefront, but it immediately brings up those big, thorny questions. Governance, rights.
Absolutely. The sources flag two major concerns right off the bat. First, what does this mean for personal data privacy? Second, what about job security?
Because these AI models, they need astronomical amounts of data to learn, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that data is, well, it's us, our information.
Exactly. And when you concentrate the control over that data and the powerful AI built on it into the hands of a few massive tech companies, well, without strong rules, robust governance, you risk jeopardizing both individual privacy and potentially automating away huge swaths of jobs.
So the conversation has to be about guardrails now. It's moved past if AI will change things to how we manage that change, finding that balance between encouraging innovation and protecting people.
That's the tightrope. And speaking of AI maturing, look at OpenAI's ChatGPT. It's becoming less like just a chatbot and more like an operating system for your workflow.
You mean the new app integrations they launched back in October 2025?
Yeah, exactly. Now you can use tools like Spotify for music, Canva for design, Figma for collaborative work directly within the ChatGPT interface just by talking to it.
So it's not just asking it to write something anymore. It's like, hey, ChatGPT, draft me a presentation on Q3 sales using Canva, pull the data from this spreadsheet, and find me a good focus playlist on Spotify while you're at it.
Pretty much.
Well,
It turns the language model into a central coordinator for tasks across different platforms. And this is all powered by a new software development kit, an SDK.
okay, so that makes it easier for other developers to plug their own tools in.
Much easier. Faster customization, quicker integration. It really is positioning ChatGPT as a platform, a foundation that other services can build on top of, managed through conversation.
Which leads us directly into this AI browser race.
Yeah.
And the security headaches that inevitably come with this kind of powerful automation.
Right. We're seeing the rise of what are being called agentic browsers. These aren't just for viewing websites, they're AI assistants built into the browser itself.
Designed to do things for you.
Exactly. Automate tasks, summarize web pages, book travel itineraries, maybe even fill out complex forms securely. OpenAI's got an entry. Perplexity's Comet browser is another example. That company's valuation reportedly hit something like $20 billion recently.
Okay, $20 billion valuation suggests there's huge perceived value there. But if the AI is handling tasks, accessing logins, filling forms, the security risk must jump significantly.
Dramatically, because the AI is interacting with sensitive information across multiple sites, potentially holding credentials, and the big vulnerability everyone's worried about is something called prompt injection.
Prompt injection. Explain that.
Okay, so because these browsers operate based on your instructions, your prompts, a cleverly hidden malicious instruction embedded somewhere, maybe in a web page the AI is reading, or in a document it's summarizing, could trick the AI.
Trick it into doing something it shouldn't.
Precisely. Trick it into handing over sensitive data. It has access to passwords, financial details, confidential documents to an attacker. The danger isn't the AI going rogue. It's the AI doing exactly what a hidden malicious prompt tells it to do.
So the AI functions perfectly, but follows bad instructions, leading to a data breach.
That's the risk, and the pressure is immense on these companies to build safeguards faster than the attackers can find ways around them, especially as these AI agents get more and more autonomous.
And we don't even need to imagine the risks, do we? There's already a pretty stark real-world example of AI getting things badly wrong in a high-stakes situation. The chip bag incident.
Ah, yes, the Kenwood High School incident. It's almost darkly comical if the consequences weren't so serious.
So they had AI monitoring systems installed for security, right?
Hmm.
Supposedly to detect weapons.
Yes. And this AI system flagged a student, Taki Allen, identifying an object he was holding as a gun.
But it wasn't a gun.
It was, according to all reports, a bag of chips. He was eating a snack after football practice.
A bag of chips. And the AI triggered.
An armed police response. The student was detained, all based on an algorithm misidentifying snack food.
Slight chuckle. You could make it up. But it's not funny for Taki Allen, obviously. He apparently said later, "I don't think a chip bag should be mistaken for a gun," which seems reasonable.
Absolutely. But this incident, it just perfectly illustrates the problem. It's not just a random glitch. It points to potential biases in the training data, maybe insufficient real-world testing, and the immense danger of removing human judgment and context from critical decisions.
Especially when the response involves armed officers and, detaining a kid, it raises huge questions about AI overreach, constant surveillance, and just how reliable these systems actually are.
It's a major cautionary tale. We need to be incredibly careful about where and how we deploy AI, especially in areas like public safety and law enforcement.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift our gaze way, way up. From microchips misidentifying snacks to the macrocosm, cosmic discoveries, and apparently a bit of a fight over space history.
Yeah, let's start with the profound stuff. New research has apparently confirmed something scientists suspected but now have stronger evidence for. Jupiter's role in our very existence.
Our solar system's giant. How did it help?
Its immense gravity, billions of years ago, was crucial. It acted like a gravitational shield, deflecting countless asteroids and comets that would have otherwise pummeled early Earth. And its influence also helps stabilize Earth's orbit, preventing us from potentially spiraling into the sun.
So we basically owe Jupiter big time for Earth being habitable.
It seems that way, a giant bodyguard in the outer solar system. We also have a really interesting breakthrough in telescope technology.
Allowing us to see things more clearly.
Much more clearly. Astronomers used a new device called a photonic-lantern attached to the Subaru telescope in Hawaii. And with it, they successfully imaged the structure of the disk around a nearby star, Beta Canis Minoris. It's apparently quite lopsided.
Okay, a photonic lantern. What does that actually do? Why is it better? It overcomes something called diffraction limits.
Right. Diffraction is basically the natural blurring effect that happens when light passes through any lens or aperture like in a telescope. It limits how much fine detail you can resolve.
So the lantern helps sharpen the image.
In a very clever way. It uses advanced fiber optics to collect light from different points as if it were coming from multiple telescopes, and then combines it very precisely without losing the phase information, the coherence of the light waves. This lets a single telescope achieve the kind of resolution you'd normally need a much larger array of telescopes for.
So sharper images of things like planet-forming disks around other stars.
Exactly. Better studies of how stars and planets form. It's a big step for observational astronomy.
Very cool. Okay, and finally in this section, back down to Earth, but still space-related, there's a political fight brewing over one of the space shuttles.
Yes, the retired Space Shuttle Discovery. It's currently housed at the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center near Washington, D.C. But two Texas senators, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, are pushing back hard.
What's their issue?
They're demanding the Department of Justice, the DOJ, investigate the Smithsonian. They allege that the museum is disassembling parts of the discovery, which they claim hinders its preservation and future public display.
And they want it moved, presumably to Texas.
That's the clear goal. They argue Texas has a central role in the history of human spaceflight, with Johnson Space Center in Houston. They believe relocating Discovery to Texas would provide better public access and be more inspiring for future generations there.
So it's a classic tussle. The Smithsonian's role as the National Museum versus a state's claim based on its historical contributions to the space program.
Exactly. It's a high-profile fight over a truly iconic piece of American history. Where does it belong? Who gets to tell its story?
Interesting. Okay, from disputes over historical artifacts and the vastness of space, let's turn now to the much more immediate and frankly volatile world of geopolitics. especially the escalating tensions we're seeing in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, things are definitely heating up there. We have to start with a significant escalation by the U.S. in the Caribbean. President Trump authorized a military strike against a vessel in international waters.
A vessel linked to who?
Linked to a powerful Venezuelan criminal group called Tren de Aragua, or TDA. The strike reportedly resulted in 6 deaths.
Okay, a U.S. military strike against a criminal group's boat in international waters. That feels like a major shift in tactics.
It is, and the justification being used is very aggressive. The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, stated publicly that the U.S. will now treat major narcotics traffickers, particularly groups like TDA operating internationally, with the same kind of severity as they treat designated terrorist organizations like al-Qaeda.
Wow. Equating large drug cartels with al-Qaeda had huge implications.
Massive implications, and it's not just rhetoric. This military action is being backed up by serious hardware. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, has been deployed to the Caribbean as part of what's being called an enhanced anti-drug campaign.
An aircraft carrier for anti-drug operations. That seems disproportionate. Or is there another layer here?
Well, that's exactly what regional leaders are saying. This move has drawn immediate and strong condemnation. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro called it a violation of international law, a provocation.
And it's not just Venezuela pushing back.
No. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has also been highly critical, and regional experts are weighing in. They see this not just as a simple anti-drug mission.
What do they suspect the real motives are?
The counterclaims are pretty blunt. They allege this is really about exerting pressure on Venezuela, potentially aimed at resource control or even regime change. And part of that is seen as an effort to counter the growing influence of Russia and China in the region, who have ties with Maduro's government.
And linking TDA to al-Qaeda, does that provide some kind of legal cover?
That's a key point analysts are making. By framing these groups like terrorists, the U.S. might be trying to leverage the existing 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF, which was passed after 9/11. That could potentially give the administration a very broad, ongoing justification for military actions near Venezuela.
Okay, so very complex geopolitical maneuvering, disguised perhaps as a drug war escalation. And speaking of President Petro of Colombia, he's now been directly targeted by the U.S.
Yes, tensions ramped up further when the U.S. Department of the Treasury imposed sanctions directly on President Petro, members of his family, and one of his senior ministers.
Sanctions on a sitting president of a major South American ally. What's the official reason given?
The Treasury alleges that Petro has allowed drug cartels to flourish, claiming cocaine production in Colombia has surged under his watch. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated these sanctions are necessary because, in their view, Petro's policies are facilitating the flow of narcotics to North America.
And Petro's response?
He's vehemently denied it. He points to his government's record of dismantling criminal groups and seizing large amounts of drugs. He's denounced the sanctions as purely political, an act of oppression aimed at undermining his leftist government, which has often been critical of U.S. policy.
So again, we see this clash. U.S. citing narcotics concerns, the targeted leader claiming political persecution and interference.
It's a recurring theme in the region right now. Very tense. Now, shifting across the world to the Middle East, the situation in Gaza remains dire, even with a ceasefire supposedly in place.
The humanitarian crisis just grinds on. What are the latest reports?
The UN is reporting that around 15,000 residents inside Gaza are currently waiting for urgent medical evacuation. They need specialized care that's simply unavailable in Gaza's devastated health system.
And they can't get out.
Movement is highly restricted, requiring Israeli facilitation. And tragically, the UN confirms that children are literally dying while waiting for that permission to leave for treatment. The system is overwhelmed, and access is bottlenecked.
That's just heartbreaking. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, tensions are high there too, especially around the olive harvest.
Yes, violence has surged significantly during the harvest season, which is absolutely critical for the Palestinian economy. Something like 80,000 to 100,000 families depend on income from olives.
And settlers are attacking farmers.
There have been numerous incidents. The sources mention 158 reported attacks against olive pickers just this season. In one specific incident in a village called Deir Nidham, settlers reportedly confronted Palestinian farmers violently.
And the Israeli military's role.
According to the reports cited, Israeli forces allegedly provided protection to the attacking settlers and then detained a local Palestinian resident. This obviously raises serious questions about impartiality and the ability of Palestinians to safely access their land.
That's deeply troubling. Is there any movement on the diplomatic front to try and stabilize things?
Well, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been advocating for the deployment of an international peacekeeping force relatively quickly. The idea is to solidify the ceasefire and help create space for some kind of new Palestinian governance structure, one separate from Hamas.
But putting together an international force isn't simple, is it? Who gets to participate?
That's the sticking point. Israel insists on having the final say over which countries contribute troops, and they've already made it clear Turkey will not be involved.
Why single out Turkey?
It goes back to regional politics. Turkey, under President Erdogan, has historically been a strong supporter of Hamas and very critical of Israeli actions. From Israel's perspective, allowing Turkish troops would mean letting in a force they see as biased, potentially hostile, and not trustworthy for ensuring Israeli security concerns, like preventing weapons smuggling into Gaza.
So finding nations acceptable to both sides remains a huge hurdle.
A massive hurdle. And finally, touching briefly on the ongoing war in Ukraine, its effects continue to ripple outwards, sometimes in unexpected ways.
Like the incident in London.
Exactly. There was an arson attack on a warehouse in London, England. This warehouse was specifically collecting and sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Subsequent investigations and trials resulted in convictions directly linking the attack to operatives associated with the Russian mercenary organization, the Wagner Group.
So a direct manifestation of the conflict playing out as criminal sabotage on British soil.
It shows how these conflicts metastasize. And on the diplomatic, or perhaps anti-diplomatic front, we saw some sharp rhetoric from Russia.
What was that?
A Russian aide, Kirill Dmitriev, publicly accused the European Union and the UK of deliberately trying to sabotage potential peace talks between President Putin and President Trump regarding Ukraine.
Sabotage talks. Why would they allegedly do that?
Dmitriev claimed the EU and UK need the Ukraine war to continue. He argued it serves as a useful distraction from their own significant domestic economic problems. Keep the international crisis boiling to keep voters from focusing on inflation or recession at home.
That's a deeply cynical take. But it highlights how geopolitical conflicts can be viewed, by some actors at least, as tools for domestic political management.
It certainly provides a lens, whether you accept the premise or not. And that idea of economic pressures and political instability is a perfect bridge to our next section. Let's dive into the global economy, trade disputes, and political fractures. What does this all mean for stability, both internationally and domestically?
Okay, let's start with the big one. U.S.-China relations. Always critical for the global economy. President Trump is heading to Asia, specifically for talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Yes, they're meeting at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, APEC, which is being held in Gyeongju, South Korea this year. And the agenda is packed. The atmosphere is reportedly quite tense.
What's top of the list for the U.S. side?
President Trump is pushing for what he calls a complete deal. A major focus is on China's compliance, or lack thereof, with the Phase 1 trade deal signed back in 2020.
Any specifics mentioned?
Yes. The sources specifically highlight the fact that China apparently hasn't imported any U.S. soybeans since 2018, despite commitments made in that deal. That's a huge sticking point for American agriculture.
So trade compliance is key. What else is on the table?
They'll also be discussing China's alleged role in the fentanyl crisis, the production and shipment of the drug and its precursors, plus the impact of U.S. sanctions on China's energy relationship with Russia, particularly concerning oil purchases. It's clearly a broad discussion covering trade, security, public health, and energy.
A lot to cover.
Yeah.
Was there any clarification on the issue of Taiwan? That always looms over U.S.-China talks.
Yes, importantly, Secretary of State Marco Rubio made a point of stating publicly before the summit that the U.S. has absolutely no plans to trade concessions on Taiwan's status in exchange for progress on trade or other issues.
So keeping those issues separate.
Explicitly separate, reassuring Taiwan and signaling to Beijing that the U.S. won't use Taiwan as a bargaining chip, despite China's consistent pressure for the U.S. to formally oppose Taiwanese independence.
Okay, a critical clarification.
Yeah.
Now, moving from U.S.-China to U.S.-Canada relations, things seem pretty frosty there, too, over an advertisement.
Slight chuckle. Yeah, it's quite something. The Premier of Ontario, Canada's most populous province, aired an advertisement criticizing U.S. tariffs. Controversially, the ad used quotes from former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, a Republican icon, arguing against protectionism.
And President Trump didn't appreciate the history lesson.
Apparently not. He responded very quickly, calling the ad a hostile act, and immediately announced an additional 10% tariff increase on Canadian goods across the board.
Wow. a 10% hike triggered by a TV commercial.
It really demonstrates how sensitive trade relations are and how quickly political rhetoric can translate into significant economic action under the current administration. The Canadians initially defended it as free speech, but the Ontario Premier did eventually pull the ad, saying they needed to pause the campaign to allow for more constructive talks.
So the tariffs had the intended effect, at least in silencing that particular critique. This backdrop of international trade tension is happening while the U.S. is facing significant problems at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
The government shutdown.
Yes, a major domestic crisis. As of the reports we're looking at, the U.S. federal government shutdown had entered its 24th day. No resolution in sight between the White House and Congress over budget issues.
And this shutdown has led to a really unusual situation regarding military pay.
Extraordinary, really, and ethically quite thorny. The Pentagon confirmed it accepted a massive anonymous donation, $130 million, specifically to ensure that active-duty military personnel would receive their paychecks on time despite the lapse in government funding.
A private donation to pay the troops. Who made it?
It was later revealed to have come from an heir to the Mellon fortune, one of America's wealthiest industrial dynasties.
Okay, so on one hand, the troops get paid, which is good, but on the other, it feels deeply weird, doesn't it? A core function of the state paying its soldiers being funded by private wealth because the political system is deadlocked.
It raises profound questions about governance. What does it say about the stability and functionality of the system when it has to rely on the, frankly, unpredictable generosity of billionaires to meet its basic obligations? Critics argue it creates a dangerous precedent, potentially allowing wealthy individuals to selectively fund parts of the government they approve of during crises.
And the contrast is pretty stark, isn't it? While this private money ensures military paychecks go out, what's happening with other essential services affected by the shutdown, like food aid?
That's the other side of the coin, and it's grim. The administration announced it would not be using emergency funds to cover the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, commonly known as food stamps.
So food aid is stopping.
Many states were reporting they were preparing to halt benefit distribution entirely. This affects millions of low-income families, children, elderly people. Critics were warning of an imminent hunger crisis directly caused by the political impasse and the administration's funding priorities within that crisis.
Private money flows to the military. The public funds for food security are cut off. The priorities seem brutally clear in that comparison.
It paints a very stark picture of the consequences of political dysfunction. Now let's look across the Atlantic again to Ireland, where there's been a significant political shift reflecting public discontent.
Yes, the presidential election results there were pretty dramatic.
Extremely dramatic. Catherine Connolly, running as an independent candidate with strong left-wing positioning, won by an absolute landslide. She took nearly 65% of the vote.
A landslide victory. What was her platform? What resonated so strongly?
Her campaign focused heavily on economic justice issues, particularly Ireland's severe housing crisis and growing income inequality. She also ran on a platform of firm military neutrality, expressing criticism of both the European Union's direction and NATO expansion.
So tapping into frustration with the status quo on both economic and foreign policy fronts.
Exactly. Her victory is being widely interpreted as a sign of deep public dissatisfaction with the existing center-right government coalition. And interestingly, this landslide happened despite very low voter turnout, only about 46%.
Low turnout, but a decisive result among those who did vote. Anything else notable about the vote?
Yes, a very high number of spoiled ballots. Roughly 1 in 8 voters intentionally invalidated their ballot paper, which is often seen as a strong protest vote against all the available options or the system itself.
So a combination of a clear mandate for change from those who voted for Connolly and significant disillusionment or protest from a chunk of the electorate.
It suggests a real fracturing, a demand for different policies from some, and perhaps a rejection of the political process from others. It really highlights how core domestic issues, like just being able to afford housing, can fuel major political realignments.
Definitely a trend to watch. Okay, before we wrap things up, let's quickly touch on a few other global threads, some climate adaptation, market news, and a couple of odd crime stories.
Right, starting with climate. An interesting story of adaptation coming out of Cape Verde, the island nation off the coast of West Africa. They're facing a major environmental challenge.
What's the issue there?
A massive influx of invasive seaweed, sargassum, washing up on their shores. It chokes coastlines, impacts tourism, harms local ecosystems. It's a growing problem in many parts of the Atlantic and Caribbean.
A real environmental headache. How are they dealing with it?
Well, this is the inspiring part. Local women are leading grassroots efforts to collect the sargassum and transform it. Instead of just disposing of it, they're processing it into high-quality organic fertilizer.
Ah, turning a problem into a resource.
Exactly. It helps clear the beaches, provides valuable fertilizer for local agriculture,
Yeah.
promoting sustainability, and potentially creating economic opportunities. A fantastic example of community-led adaptation.
That really is positive news. Okay, shifting to the financial markets. A big milestone was hit recently in the U.S.
Yes, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, one of the main U.S. stock market indices, closed above 37,000 points for the first time ever.
47,000. What drove that rally?
It seems largely fueled by optimism following a relatively mild inflation report. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, came in cooler than expected.
And low inflation is generally good for stocks.
Generally, yes. It reduces the pressure on the central bank, the Federal Reserve, to raise interest rates aggressively, which can slow down the economy. So a cooler CPI reading signals to investors that maybe the economic conditions are looking a bit more stable.
Interesting. But while the stock market hits highs, the housing market picture is more mixed, right? Especially regionally.
Very much so. The sources note a significant divergence. While some parts of the U.S. housing market might be softening slightly, home prices in the Northeast region are actually growing rapidly.
Really? Even with mortgage rates still being quite high.
Apparently so. The explanation seems to be a combination of factors unique to the Northeast right now. Very strong underlying demand for housing, persistently low inventory of homes for sale, and relatively robust local economies in those areas.
So, local economic strength and supply-demand dynamics are outweighing the impact of higher borrowing costs in that specific region.
It seems that way. It's a reminder that real estate is always, to some extent, local.
True. Okay, and finally, just a couple of slightly bizarre, unrelated crime stories that caught our eye, reflecting maybe on public trust and security. First, France and its museum woes.
Chuckles slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems French museums are having a rough time following that really audacious jewel theft from the Louvre, remember, where they used a furniture lift to hoist a safe out.
Unbelievable. What happened next?
Just hours later, gold and silver coins were stolen from another French museum. Two major heists in quick succession.
That's going to trigger some serious reviews of museum security, I imagine.
Absolutely. There's widespread discussion now about security protocols across Europe. Some are even suggesting that maybe the most priceless artifacts need to be moved into deep, fortified underground vaults for safekeeping. It points to potentially more sophisticated, maybe even coordinated, criminal gangs targeting these institutions.
A worrying trend for cultural heritage. And the other story was from Hong Kong.
Yes, a rather chilling case of mistaken identity. 3 men, reported to have affiliations with organized crime groups, triads, were arrested for a violent knife attack on a 20-year-old man.
But he wasn't the intended target.
No, apparently he was attacked simply because he looked similar to someone else who was involved in some kind of monetary dispute with the attackers or their associates.
So an innocent person severely injured just because of a resemblance.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder of the dangers of organized crime operating with, frankly, brutal carelessness in densely populated cities. Innocent bystanders getting caught in the crossfire, sometimes literally just due to looking like someone else.
Chilling indeed. Okay, that covers an absolutely immense range of topics today, from, the microscopic switches in our lungs to the gravitational dance of planets to global trade wars, AI mistakes, and violent crime.
It really does feel like a whirlwind. We've touched on these incredible scientific efforts trying to fundamentally heal the body using genetics, understanding biology at a deeper level. But at the same time, we see the immense power and the potential pitfalls of AI. That chip bag incident. It's a small thing, but it symbolizes the real-world risks when automation goes wrong, underscoring that need for governance we talked about.
And then the geopolitical stage.
Yeah.
Just constant tension, outright military actions and sanctions being used as primary tools of statecraft in the Americas. A desperate, ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza alongside escalating violence in the West Bank, with diplomatic solutions seemingly blocked by national interests and vetoes.
And underpinning so much of it is this sense of political fragmentation and instability. The U.S. government itself in a shutdown crisis, funded partly by private wealth. Countries like Ireland showing this deep public dissatisfaction with the established political order, demanding fundamental changes to economic policy.
Which brings us back to that jarring contrast we highlighted earlier. You have the U.S. military deploying the most powerful aircraft carrier ever built to the Caribbean, officially to fight drug cartels, framing them like global terrorists.
While simultaneously back home, the political system is so broken that the government can't even guarantee the regular paychecks for the troops on that carrier without relying on the charitable intervention of a private banking fortune.
It really crystallizes a central tension, doesn't it? So the final thought we want to leave you, our listener, with today is this. What does it truly tell us about the state of governance, about national priorities, when essential state functions like paying your own military become dependent on the whims of individual philanthropy because the political institutions themselves have failed to reach a resolution?
It's something to definitely chew on. It speaks volumes about the complex and often contradictory world we're navigating right now.
Absolutely. A lot to think about. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and keep digging beneath the surface with us.
You're enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.